The Soviet Union itself is no more.
The United States military has begun strikes.
Light them all up.
Считаю, что для современного мира однополярная модель не только неприемлема, но и вообще невозможна.
Народные республики Донбасса обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Russian military is taking chips from dishwashers and refrigerators to fix their military hardware. Russia's industry is in tatters.
Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been.
And we are live for the first time ever. I know this is a new face that you guys are all seeing. I'm not Sarah, and it's a pretty interesting thing to be streaming for the first time, but this is just not one step back, and my co-contributor Grant and our guest Ryan, we will be speaking about the Russia Treaty and also a little bit about the START Treaty and the RussiaGate, and along with a little bit about FDR and the relationship with Stalin. Which one is Sarah? I'm not Sarah at all. She wishes she was me, but I'm joking. But
she's double.
Yeah. So hi, not Sarah. Hi, guys. I'm really excited. This is the first time ever. And Ryan is, he's a great mutual of mine. He agreed to do this after I met him in a space that I hosted with Scott Ritter. And that episode is going to be coming out soon that I do have with him on Syria that myself and Grant did. But yeah, it's going to be really exciting to have this conversation and, you know, create a nice little bridge with the people on Scott's side and such. So thank you, Ryan, for joining in, and Grant as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for invitation.
Of course.
And I hope, as I said, I hear the echo. I hope the audience doesn't hear the echo. But history is moving so fast right now. It's hard to keep up. So first of all, let me just tell you is that today, Scott Ritter just released an article on his Substack from Russia.
Congrats.
And I think that's, yes, we're saying that there is an echo. So, all right, let me kind of jump in because he starts off in his article about basically, what was it, June 3rd, 2024. He was boarding the airplane headed for Russia, and I was supposed to come with the rest of the team the next day or two after that to begin filming a documentary for Americans on Russia. And, you know, armed Border Patrol and Customs took him off the plane and treated him, well, abridged his right to free speech as an American citizen, treated him like a criminal, and also really treated Americans like a bunch of mushrooms that you keep in the dark and just feed, you know, bullshit to. That's how they treated all of us. So it's an emotional time because this is very good. We're also on the eve of potentially a history-changing summit in Alaska between the president of Russia and the president of the United States. And I know that there are people out there who think that, you know, they're wary. There are some who even criticize it, saying, well, you can't ever trust the United States. And I get it, why people would say that. But I think that when you think about the relationship of the United States to Russia, our 250 years of existence, the Russians have been there the entire time. And the American relationship to Russia is something that most Americans don't know. But the Russians have a very long sense of history. And we need to develop that same sense of history because we wouldn't exist, not just Alaska being America, but America being America if it weren't for Russia. So I definitely want to key off of Scott's leadership because he made the point that the decades of horrific policy of the United States with regards to Russia and the fact that he's there as part of the National Unity Club to speak, he said it's the ignorance that has bred the bad policy. So kind of, I know you guys might have something, but I just wanted to start briefly by referencing an interview in 1998, which was just a few years. So I was, just to back up a little bit about myself, who am I, right? Maybe that would be useful for people. I was in my high school years, I decided to learn about Russia. I was a very conservative guy, hardcore Republican, George H.W. Bush, math scholar, that kind of thing. But I had an opportunity under a program created by President Eisenhower called People to People Exchange to go to the Soviet Union. And I did that in 1991, just prior to the full disintegration and collapse of the Soviet Union. And I'll tell you what, that changed my life because at that point, it was clear to me that the people of Russia, the Soviet Union, the people of the United States are not that different. We have language differences, but kind of the scales were lifted from my eyes, because we have been taught this is the enemy, and I did not see an enemy. So now jump to a few years later, 1998, but the guy who created the Soviet containment policy, George Kennan, was interviewed by Thomas Friedman. And in that interview, he basically said that the NATO expansion doctrine was a tragic mistake, that now with the collapse of the Soviet system, he said, our argument with the Soviet Union is over, that Russia has progressed, and that this policy was going to end in tragedy and destruction. And so, ironically, the guy who created the policy that was probably one of the worst policies of all time said that before he died, right? That policy was a problem. So I just wanted to start off by mentioning those few things, and you have to forgive me a little bit. I'm a little bit emotional. My dog died today, and
sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So I just want you to know. I hope I don't break up too much here, but anyway, I'm very glad to be here.
I'm so sorry, Ryan. I had no idea.
That's all right. No, it's okay. I feel compelled by history to be here with you all. So
no, of course, and I'm very happy that you're here. You're a very strong person, and you have an amazing story. And this stream is definitely in honor of your dog, for sure.
Thank you.
100%. Even during difficult times, I think a lot of us have to, push through, even if it may be a little bit hard. And, a lot of that reminds me of how, Russia's history and the Russian people and Russia as a nation, and also how America and, the American people have also had to kind of deal with, right? Because of so many different tragedies and experiences and such that they've had to experience and witness, they still keep prevailing and they keep persevering. And that's the spirit of, these people, right, of all nations. And I think that's a beautiful thing for sure.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you on, Ryan. And we really appreciate also that intro, because a lot of people will know you as one of the big three of U.S. Tour of Duty. You're also one of the co-hosts of the Whiners. Yeah, we're really excited to gain your insight and the fact that you have that hands-on experience interacting, similar to Scott, with the Soviet Union, the people, etc. We're really excited to be able to gain that insight.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It is something that it kind of boggles my mind, the significance of the times that we live in. So there are a few things that I think, just in reflection of what Scott was saying about ignorance, about Kennan, things that are happening because people are angry at Trump. Things are just in such conflict and flux. But I think I want to sort of talk about this question of the New START Treaty in a certain context, and go back and forward in history, because it seems to be the only way that I can organize my own thoughts about this. One of the things that recently happened that I consider to be extremely important, we've had Trump's arguments with Medvedev, totally in an imbecilic kind of way, and yet now we have Witkoff proffering to Russia to meet, and now Donald Trump is saying that Zelensky's going to have to just sign on the dotted line to what needs to happen. So I do feel, you plan for the worst, but you do have to hope for the best, and you have to focus on what the potential is to change the course of history. From that standpoint, I want to focus initially on the revelations of RussiaGate by DNI Tulsi Gabbard in that context, because I've been struggling over this, and I've been reading some of the documents from the Durham Annex that were forced out by Chairman of the Judiciary, Charles Grassley. And some of the phrases in there talk about how the purpose of RussiaGate was to intensify the U.S. confrontational tendencies towards Russia. If the relations between our two countries, and by doing that, end the threat that NATO represents, and the threat of perpetual militarization of the globe represents, to transform the course of history, peace through economic development, to bring that about, it would have to be around a transformation of the relationship between the United States and Russia. And so the whole RussiaGate, not that Trump himself is some great, Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln or John F. Kennedy, but the fact is that history has moved to the point that people realize we had to actually make a transformation. RussiaGate was designed to prevent that. It was kind of the culmination of the continuing neoconservative policy to bring about that perpetual war. So her revelation, DNI Tulsi Gabbard's revelation, to me represents the potential for American citizens to assert that no, peace is going to prevail. So I want to put that kind of in the forefront of your mind. We can't forget that there's a lot that can happen. What we want is the truth to come out, not some politicized, Democrat versus Republican, Republican versus Democrat kind of a, low-level political argument, which is what too many people in the United States tend to devolve into, right? We want to take this from the most strategic standpoint in our own thinking. So from that standpoint, I was thinking about Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, announcing that now Russia is prepared to have this discussion. They've had a very, very specific policy that the goals of the special military operation are one goal only. And now with President Putin essentially saying, you have NATO and Ukraine pull back, and we can have a ceasefire immediately. I mean, this is a change, and this shows you that as much as we have abused the relationship, they're still ready to fix it, to change the course.
Do you believe that a ceasefire with regard to the conflict in Ukraine may be a stepping stone to the renewal of the New START treaty?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know exactly how this is going to happen, but my view is that with certain this consistent drive, nearly daily, you have Moscow warning of the trajectory towards war. Recently it came out that the United States was potentially deploying new B-61-12 nuclear weapons to London. There's been various flights that from the United States to the UK where we used to house weapons back prior to 2008. So you see this kind of convergence. I do think that Donald Trump wants to stop the killing. I don't think he knows what that means. So I think that you have Russia, you have Putin and the president talking, and you can actually get somewhere. If you don't have people like Keith Kellogg involved, if you don't have people like Keir Starmer involved, Mertz, these guys, if you just kind of clear the dirt away so that you can then have a high level discussion, then I think you can get somewhere. So just on this question of the New START, that does expire February 2026. And there has not been one bit of discussion about that yet. I know that I was reading in TASS earlier, President Trump did say, hey, this is a treaty we don't want it to go away. It's very important. I think it's important to just kind of back up a little bit, if I could, and talk a little bit about the history of it, because it happened really in my lifetime. I was pretty shocked. The original START treaty was between President Bush and Gorbachev in 1991. So, and it's funny because when I was in the Soviet Union, I was 17. I had no real idea. I knew something momentous was happening, but I had no idea exactly how momentous it was. The treaty was to last from 1991 to 2010. That was signed. That's basically kind of the beginning. The New START treaty was signed in April of 2010 by Presidents Obama and President Medvedev, and went into force February of 2011. And it really was incredible because it halved the number of strategic nuclear missile launchers. There was an inspection regime. It didn't limit the number of operationally inactive warheads that were stockpiled, but it was supposed to last 10 years, which meant 2021 is when it would expire, and could be extended for a period of 5 years if both sides agreed to it. Now, so that was 2010. As of 2012, Russia was fully within the requirements of the treaty. So they had 1,499 warheads on 491 delivery vehicles. The treaty was limiting everything at 1,550. At that time, the U.S. was not abiding by the numbers required. We had about 1,700. As of 2013, the Obama administration was already looking to develop a first strike capability against Russia. And in fact, I was looking back in some of my notes here. The Izborsk Club, which was a new policy shaping group as of 2012, they had actually released a report internally that verified various other studies at the time that the United States was looking for a way to take out Russia's means to retaliate against a nuclear attack, thus making thermonuclear war absolutely likely. And in 2012, the discussion by the chief of Russian Armed Forces General Staff, Nikolai Makarov, was that the ballistic missile defense strategy of the United States was not really to defend against Iran, that it was to create a global nuclear, ballistic missile capability. So, important to me, in 2005, I was in Brussels at a conference of about 150 political, military, journalists, and others. You might have seen this before in history. It's called the Axis for Peace. I was meeting for the first time certain Russian military leaders. There were Europeans, Americans. They were all there to discuss the dangers of what was going on with the Iraq War and the threat of the danger of nuclear war, and how Russia was again asserting peace. So this stuff was in my mind already at that time, while all of these discussions were happening. So that was 2005 when I was actually starting to think about these things at a more deep level. 2019, you had Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He stressed on Russian national TV that Russia wanted to move forward with the New START treaty. and that they would even include the avant-garde Sarmat missile systems in the new treaty when that would be extended. So I want to paint a certain picture to you that every step of the way, Russia was saying, we want to make this better. We want to make the potential for peace greater. He said at the time that missile defense, space-based missile defense should be on the table, that everything should be open for discussion. At that time, President Vladimir Putin had said that the Russian armed forces, that he himself were ready to extend the treaty right away with no preconditions. 2020, the U.S. offered to extend the treaty. Russia accepted. And by 2021, that was when the decision was made to prolong the treaty. And it was only in 2023, after the special military operation, when Russia suspended its participation in the New START treaty. However, they did not withdraw from the treaty. They clarified that they would abide by the numerical limits in the treaty. The only thing with the treaty that has been something that caught my attention was that tactical systems like F-35s, F-16s, F-15Es, which are nuclear capable, were not covered. Other kinds of mobile ICBM launchers that neither side had, rail-mounted systems, these were not covered by the treaty. So the treaty definitely needs to be reworked. That's an important thing to know. But this is also partly why it's time that we look at this, because U.S. moving nuclear weapons to the UK, F-35 testing of B-6112s. The fact is that we're now starting the B-6113 development program now, which will actually make that a new viable weapon over the next couple of years. So it behooves us to move on this treaty or the next generation of the treaty. And I think that the ceasefire, the discussion in Alaska, could put that on the table. And I think we should be open to the possibility that could happen.
Yeah, and so I've been reading Scott's book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, a lot lately. And a common theme that I've been noticing, if we want to trace it back to, well, for example, the INF Treaty that book specifically focuses on, there seems to be a running theme that the topic of arms control seems to really be Russia taking the lead, especially in recent decades. It's to my understanding that the INF was very much a product of Gorbachev pushing for that. And it seems that the United States has actually been the government that has been pulling out of these treaties and thereby making nuclear warfare relevant again.
Yes, that really does. That is the case, and I should also mention that the Russian Foreign Ministry, in the last couple of days, has also put out a statement that the self-imposed limitations of the INF Treaty, even though the treaty is basically that we've pulled out of that, they still had self-imposed limitations based on that treaty that they were abiding by, that they now are officially no longer abiding by those limitations. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier the neoconservative drive. I mean, really, I think that it's important to go back now a little bit in the history, because you had prior to, well, take Franklin Roosevelt, right, and the relationship that we had developed with the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. It wasn't just to defeat the Nazis. You had also, by the way, a great book that I do recommend is, I think it's Susan Butler's book, about the friendship between, or the relationship between, Franklin Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin, which really hinged on their meeting in Tehran. And it was very clear at a certain point. One of the anecdotes that I really like is how Roosevelt worked very hard to get Stalin to invite him to stay at the Soviet embassy, as opposed to staying at the American embassy or the British embassy. That he wanted to make it very clear that the United States and the Soviet Union were going to, with the other allies, but they were going to lead the effort in the post-war period in an anti-imperial policy for the world. And it's very important for people to understand the United States does have a history of anti-imperialism. It's spotty, it's troubled. It's by no means a continuous thread from our beginning, but Roosevelt made that very clear, got that across to Joseph Stalin, and Stalin understood it. He understood, and there was a transformation in the entire relationship. There are some other books, Timmy. I think I've mentioned to you some of those books, like As He Saw It by Elliot Roosevelt also is another one. We were going to roll back the whole colonial outlook in the world. Even if you look, I mean, this is, I was just in Russia for the 80th anniversary of the victory over the Nazis in World War II. And the entire country was mobilized to recognize and celebrate the heroic victory of the Soviet Union, which we did help in. We were allies. We participated in that victory. And it's not really very clear to people, though, what happened in the post-war period. The plan was we were going to dismantle the British, the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, all the empires, including colonies of the United States like the Philippines. These places were going to revert to the self-rule of those people. Roosevelt was on board with that. That's why he was called a traitor to his class. The Soviets understood that, and that has been really kind of the problem, because it was always supposed to be British brains, American brawn, that the empire wasn't just going to be maybe the British Empire, but the Anglo-American Empire was going to rule the world. And Roosevelt was committed to dismantling that. So what happened, and also, I also want to mention, it's also the 80th anniversary of dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which Eisenhower was against. Actually, there was a huge contingency of U.S. leaders who were against that because it would upset the potential for that post-war period. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to go back to that and mark that as an important inflection, because when Roosevelt died, the United States was essentially brought back under the control, if you will, of the British through Winston Churchill, his outlook, which was the Operation Unthinkable, to invade the Soviet Union, really to completely undo what was a tremendous amount of work to build the nation. So this has been the issue, this battle inside the United States for which policy is going to run the United States. Are we just the British muscle, or are we the republic that wants to see other republics? That's kind of what the world is so angry at us about. Anyway, I might have digressed a little bit there, Grant.
No, that's great. I'm something of a historian on the Second World War myself, majored in history in college. I really like that you debunk a lot of those, a lot of our popular perception here in the West about the nature of U.S.-Soviet relations from the period, because we have this mythology in the West, I think a lot of it due to neoliberal mythology, about this whole Anglo-American, Roosevelt siding with Churchill and always having this distant relationship could not be further from the truth. In fact, Ike,
Go ahead.
Ike actually opposed Operation Torch initially because it was viewed as a sideshow. Why are we protecting British colonial interests in North Africa and the Middle East instead of taking the fight directly into the heart of the Reich itself?
Exactly.
And launching that cross-channel invasion. So yeah,
and
really
Stalin was trying to get that, and it was Churchill who was dragging the feet, stalling, because there were some Americans who said, "Yeah, let Hitler and the Soviet Union, let them kill each other off," right? Which is right there with the British ideology. Let me just back up a little bit. Even more, back in the 80s, there was a very good article I want your audience to look at called "How America Helped Build the Soviet Machine," American Heritage. And one thing that's very interesting: Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, they opted for American technological development in the Soviet Union to help build the new Soviet Union. So we had Ford's River Rouge plant. They wanted to take that, recreate all of the work of Cary, Indiana, in Nizhny Novgorod. That's what they did. Americans don't remember Frederick Taylor, who helped to build scientific management and how you take and build a modern industrial productive capacity. But the Soviets, they adopted that. So, even then, of course, you can go back further to General Grenville Dodge, who was a Civil War general who helped with the Philadelphia Railroad industrialists to build the Trans-Siberian Railroad with Count Sergei Witte. This was hated by that neoliberal grouping that you're talking about. That relationship was hated.
Yeah, and what we've seen now, especially when we can bring it all back to Crimea of yesteryear, where you look at the Crimean War and how we've the British and the Russians have had this centuries almost long feud, due in large part to Russia standing in the way of Britain's colonial goals and aspirations and whatnot. And now we've inherited that, and it seems like it's coming to roost it came home to roost in 2014 in Crimea and is now ballooned to this now larger conflict in Ukraine. It's also worth noting that even in the 80s, there were talks of, after a series of diplomatic breakthroughs between the United States and the Soviet Union, that there were even, if I'm not mistaken, talks about cooperation on things of the nature, for example, of counterterrorism and whatnot.
After 9/11, the first phone call that the United States got was from President Putin. Yep, saying we're pledging the entire military intelligence capability of Russia to the United States to track down the terrorists.
One of our editors, fun fact actually a little bit about that little period, one of our editors is a fellow by the name of Christian Gorecki. I encourage everyone watching to follow him on Instagram too. You can also find him at Unite America Movement. And I believe he had an uncle who I think was an infantryman, he mentioned to me. He was actually based out of Uzbekistan at, I believe, a Russian air base for the entry of U.S. forces into Afghanistan. So the Russians were even letting us use their bases to launch the initial stages of Operation Enduring Freedom.
Right.
And yet I can recall, I'm 24 for context, the education I got in high school, I had this, pretty classic neoliberal type as a history teacher, a course that I took on wars of the 20th century. he, with no sense of irony, stated that America and Russia have, in essence, never been allies since 1917. And he goes on to go on about this cartoonish depiction of the character of the Russian military as shoot first, ask questions later, kill anyone in sight, take territory.
Waves of flesh, right?
Meanwhile, and yet he's the same type to also mention how much he was against the invasion of Iraq, which I'm sure all three of us here would oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq. But the liberal hypocrisy and tendency to criticize the national character of Russia, while in the same breath, kind of that doublethink going on of constantly condemning but still downplaying how murderous American foreign policy has been really since the conclusion of the Second World War.
Yes. One. So I just want to go back to something that was important. Scott Ritter has something called the Russia House, and it is a subscription program on his Telegram. I also help to manage his Telegram presence and work with him on some of the social media things. But just what you're saying, it's very difficult to actually get a clear understanding of Russian-American history, the intricacies, the nuances in English. It's almost difficult. If you read some of the famous Sovietologists from Edinburgh University, you're really struck by exactly what you're describing, this absolute hostility, grudging willingness to recognize anything that was good or creative. But one of the interviews in the Russian House was with Igor Shishkin, who was talking about the rise of the Fourth Reich today in Germany with Merz and the militarization. Let me just mention, you have had some recent new treaties between the UK and the Germans, the UK and France. So a new tripart relationship that actually you can put on the screen. I have a picture there of these four European leaders, right? So Merz on the left, that's Tusk, Donald Tusk of Poland, Keir Starmer, and Macron of France. Their recent meetings, which have been called, what was this treaty called? The Kensington Treaty, in honor of Queen Victoria. So they're preparing for war with Russia. Igor Shishkin noted everything that I've been talking about with regards to Operation Unthinkable and the lack of change in the thinking today of the leadership of these nations. Actually, there's a video there. If you would put that on the screen, it's
Russia used a small tactical nuclear weapon against let's say, a European base. The Americans, but also the French, could use a tactical nuclear weapon or a non-strategic nuclear weapon in response, keeping it at that lower level of escalation. The UK, the argument goes, and I've heard MOD officials make this argument, is to say we can't fire a single non-strategic weapon from our subs because we'd give away the location of our submarine. It would be spotted by the Russians, and the entire arsenal that protects the UK would be at risk. Is that argument viable in your view, or is it a bit ropey?
I think it's a bit ropey. I think it should at least be questioned. Some of it relies on technical assessments which are not public. But the reality is the warheads on UK submarines do have variable yields. It's not simply one.
Which means you can dial them up to megatons or down to tens of kilotons, Hiroshima, Nagasaki levels.
Exactly. Much more limited yields in nuclear terms.
Yes, it's all relative.
It is.
We're not implying these are small weapons.
Not at all. Not at all. This is very serious. But of course, you can limit the damage further by what you attack. You don't, in a demonstration shot, you probably wouldn't attack a city or somewhere where there's large casualties. You'd attack somewhere where the casualties are much more limited, and maybe an isolated military base or whatever it might be. The UK can fire a single missile from a submarine. It doesn't have to fire them all at once. It can fire a single missile with a single warhead. So that can be a demonstration shot. Where there's, I think, a difference, an argument, is whether that submarine could then move rapidly enough before the Russians or whoever the adversary was could take it out. And I think there's a good argument to be made that, given that this is precisely the sort of thing the Royal Navy is likely to be planning for, that they would be able to do that, and therefore, the Russians do not have missiles in the sky able to take out something within minutes.
And they don't have great space surveillance. We've seen that in Ukraine. Their surveillance satellites, it shouldn't be discounted, but they're old, a bit ropey themselves.
Yeah.
They're not sort of watching every bit of the Atlantic at every second. It's not a sci-fi movie.
So, yeah, I think you can take that down. I think that is, so I wanted to bring this up because this discussion was March 24th. The London Economist is the imperial magazine in England, and the guy with the gray hair, that was Malcolm Chalmers, who was 17 years the Deputy Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. And here they're having a very calm discussion about a demonstration nuclear strike on Russia. It shows you that the thinking is right there. That hostility that is no different than Winston Churchill after Franklin Roosevelt died. It is present to the present day in the forefront of their thinking. Already in May of 2022, Chalmers had proposed in the London Financial Times something of a Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids with Russia over Ukraine and Crimea. So, I mean, it goes without saying that they are constantly thinking this way, and that we are presented with the case as Americans in particular, that this is how we have to be because Russia is the enemy. So, and it's a seamless line in, Soviet Union, now it's Russia, but it's still dictatorship. And that's going to be something very difficult to get out of people's thinking. So that's there. And that represents a clear and present danger. You had not long ago Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan, who is a director of plans and policy at Stratcom, argued last year that we would, if we had to have a nuclear exchange with Russia, we wanted to do it in such a way that we could reserve the capacity that we could have a follow-up attack. Scott Ritter had said, we've already crossed a red line with that statement. Boris Johnson recently, when Donald Trump was in his war of words with Medvedev, he said that Trump has, now come to, essentially, he said he's come to our side in the thinking. Keith Kellogg in 2022 had proposed moving the Ohio-class submarines around. So what has happened is that the conditions for which the Russians built the dead hand perimeter defense system back in the 1980s, those have come back. All of the preconditions to want that war, or to go towards that war, not want it, but to go towards that war, have been met just by our own behavior. So I mean, I would agree with what Scott has said in the past, Scott Ritter. We should get as many Americans to go to Russia as possible, like I did, because it will transform their thinking. But short of that, we have to really make it very clear to Americans, you know, that this is not the fight we're looking for. This is not what we want. This is not in the interest of the United States. If we're into our interest, this is not it.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize too, because a lot of people think that it just comes down to a lot of people who I've talked to in my personal life make this mistake when trying to analyze the nature of nuclear weapons, and they'll resort to, oh, nuclear weapons are just a you know what measuring contest, an intimidation tool. But a lot of people don't realize that it only takes one miscommunication for the first missiles to fly. I would point to Able Archer 83 when that song 99 Red Balloons by Nina. It was inspired by that incident where because of a glitch on the with the Soviet detection systems, the Soviet Strategic Command had their fingers ready to launch, only for there to be a stand down moments later when it was a false alarm, essentially. But 83, particularly dangerous year of the Cold War, between the remarks about the Soviets being the so-called evil empire. You got Grenada, you got the barracks bombing in Beirut, very time of uncertainty, plus Brezhnev's passing, I believe, that year. You compare and contrast that today with multiple proxy conflicts around the globe. Cambodia and Thailand just had a border conflict. We have what started off as a war in Gaza has now expanded to multiple fronts in Lebanon, elsewhere. And at any moment could erupt into renewed fighting between Israel and Iran. And in the midst of all of this, we have two global powers with their fingers right over the button.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for me, I've had to ignore 90% of what Donald Trump says in public because, again, I'm going to quote Scott Ritter. He says, elections do matter. With the Biden administration, the danger of nuclear war was nearly absolute, the way that things were moving. Yet, I think that it's probably thought in Russian terms that you also have to ignore a lot of what Donald Trump says in public, too, because he's mercurial. He changes from moment to moment. You don't know what he's, what he's going to say, if who's talking to him. And back in, I think it was 1994, you had a top, I think, yes. Well, he was a policy internal analyst by the name of Wayne Mary, who had been in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And he had written a lengthy memorandum warning that that the United States attitude towards Russia, now that the Soviet Union had collapsed, was dangerous. So there have been periods throughout the entire post-war period where American specialists, American experts have warned, that the track that we're on should change. So this idea that it's somehow a monolithic idea that we are to be enemies is not true. And that's extremely important. Mary's objections back in 1994 to the way that the United States was treating Russia was called Whose Russia is it anyways? Towards a policy of benign respect. And he slammed the U.S. prioritization of emphasizing all of these neoliberal market reforms. I know at the time, Sergei Glasiev was a top economist in Russia, had written a book that I had helped to co-publish with Executive Intelligence Review called, I think it was called Russia and the New World Order, which detailed just the looting and the destruction of Russia. Wayne Mary was essentially saying that you have this virulent attempt to ram a foreign square peg into an American round hole, and that we were diminishing the reservoir of goodwill towards America that existed in Russia at the time. Now, that was not declassified until relatively recently. I don't remember exactly when. But the interesting thing is that with the CIA, they have what they call a dissent channel. So essentially File 13. So that dissent was not even tracked to the leadership of the United States because it was dissenting. So you're allowed to dissent, but it's not allowed to see the light of day. But it's important now that that's available that we recognize these kinds of things and bring this to Americans' attention on a daily basis.
Now, I want to wind it back just a little bit because I call it the dragging the feet doctrine, which we mentioned with regards to a figure like Churchill. Now, someone that Western media has tried to spin into their beloved modern Winston Churchill has been that of Volodymyr Zelensky. And Zelensky has been dragging his feet on coming to the table to end this conflict. You look at the state of the Ukrainian armed forces, it's been kind of a running gag on a Jimmy Dore's show, for example, where he'll point out the auditoriums, and it's 40 to 60-year-old men. They're having to abduct handicapped people off of the street and pull them in unmarked vans. The Ukrainian armed forces has been all but decimated. I think Scott actually put it best when he said that basically Putin has handedly defeated NATO's proxy army on the battlefields of Ukraine. In short, this war, the longer it drags on, the more damage it does to Ukrainian society. Why, though, is Zelensky so hesitant, and why is he so adamant on dragging this nightmare for his people out for so long?
Well, let me say, I don't know, but I have a couple of thoughts about it. One is that he's got an Azov Stepan Bandera gun at his head. It's that, or he figures that he has to do it to save his career, save his life in some way. He hasn't gotten an offer, and nobody said, "Hey, come here and you'll be safe." I have to think it's some combination of that, because you go back and you look at the election votes and the maps of who voted for who, going back to the 2010 elections in Ukraine, and Ukraine itself is not. It's a divided country itself. It's not really a real country in a certain way, because so much of its own territory comes from these neighbors. And also, by the way, that lends to why Russia would not want to conquer all of Ukraine and just keep marching west, because more than half of Ukraine itself is hostile to Russia. Why would you want to have to deal with that in the future? So I can only imagine that you have this problem, that you have NATO is probably telling him, we're going to prop you up. There may be a case here, for example, that if President Trump and President Putin do change the relationship between our two countries, you might have a situation where part of Ukraine and all of Europe go a separate way. You know, to your point about NATO being defeated, I mean, NATO's being defeated. It's not just the proxy, it's NATO. It's all of NATO. You know, we had all hoped that Donald Trump would pull out of NATO. Maybe this gives him the ability to do that in one way or the other.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, just sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I mean, and you look at NATO's track record when it comes down to actually waging war, and it's abysmal. It wasn't that long ago in 2021 that they lost a 2-decade-long conflict in the mountains of Afghanistan. Now they're resorting to proxy warfare against Russia and Ukraine. They're getting defeated there. You know, the point is not only is it a expansionist and invasive and imperialist alliance, it's also an extremely inefficient alliance. But more to the point, I'd like to ask, because with this stream, I consider it something of a patriotic duty for Timmy and I to raise awareness about the prospect of nuclear war. You know, there's a quote that a nuclear conflict could very well be mankind's last. And the fact that we are the closest to global thermonuclear war that we've come since the Cuban Missile Crisis back in '62. And, you know, I believe it's the duty not only of Americans to raise awareness about this issue, but also in Russia, which we see the Russian government taking steps to try and prevent global thermonuclear war. I would like to ask, because it's, to my understanding, a U.S. tour of duty has projects ongoing on this topic, between Scott regularly speaking on the topic of nuclear war. Plus, you guys have a documentary coming out, 38 minutes. How could ordinary people get involved in this mission of preventing global thermonuclear war?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Project 38. Scott had a Substack article actually called Project 38, and that is going to become very important. I've read it multiple times, and every time I read it, I'm realizing that American citizens have more power now to tell the truth about this very danger if they educate themselves and put the pressure on their elected officials. You know, there was a period of time when I used to campaign in the streets when I call it the Cheney-Bush administration. When they were in there, I was out in the streets with Americans across the United States calling for the impeachment of Dick Cheney, because we knew that he and his Straussian counterparts, Paul Wolfowitz and all of these others, were architects for war. We had to voice what had to be done. They had to be removed. You know, there was a lot of people that were very hopeful for Barack Obama. He adopted that same policy. There was no change. So guess what? We had to call for his impeachment as well, because it is treason against the United States to be threatening these kinds of wars. What Scott is outlining in the Project 38 is literally to create a team B of experts on policy, politics, nuclear threat, arms control, missile defense. You know, think about people like Ray McGovern, who was a presidential briefer. These are people who could, with their combined experience, they could advise a Trump administration tomorrow on exactly the steps to take on a new treaty. Maybe we don't call it the New START Treaty. Maybe we call it the Transformation of Mankind Treaty. I don't know. But these experts still exist today. And so Americans have to, number one, I think they have to allow their imagination to conceive that they themselves could actually change the policy of the president of the United States. I mean, how many people thought a year ago, 2 years ago, that Marjorie Taylor Greene would be saying there's genocide in Gaza? We should be getting out of this war in Ukraine. The whole situation with MAGA and Maha, because you did have before he endorsed Donald Trump, you had Bobby Kennedy. Well, actually, it was after Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump Jr. had penned in the Hill an article warning of the danger of nuclear war with Russia, and they made it very clear. So Americans need to go and find these things and say, hey, look, it exists. We're for these policies. Donald Trump made a promise that he wanted to prevent the danger of nuclear war. It's way past, the 100 days, but it doesn't mean that we can't hold him to that. And so we do that by making it clear to our fellow Americans. I talked to MAGA people. I was talking to Scott Ritter on Ask the Inspector on Wednesday. It blows my mind how many conservative Americans, they are saying, hey, this doesn't look right, and we need to extricate ourselves from these conflicts. So we have to use the darkness of the hour to also recognize that it's in that darkness you can see the light of potential, right? And so we have to organize our Americans to quickly learn the history that we can extricate ourselves from this and put the pressure on our president. Does that mean going and visiting your congressman, your state legislator? State legislators are extremely important. They are far more responsive oftentimes than congressmen, just because they're members of the community. They live in the district. They have to respond. So we can actually do these kinds of things. It is not easy, but nothing good, nothing worth achieving is easy, to put it in those terms. Making oneself at least knowledgeable in something like Project 38. We're hoping on the whiners to have some kind of a dialogue. We're using the medium of wine, or at least discussions over wine. Not everybody drinks wine on the whiners, but we're using that medium to broaden that whole discussion. Recently, we had Lawrence Freeman talking about the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. There is the potential for economic development if we would get past this war thing. We can channel all these funds into development. So that's what I'm saying. We have to get people's sense of imagination. We have to also give them the tools to know the history, know that our original enemy in the United States was the British Empire. We had a revolution. It was a recognized world revolution against imperialism. Thank God that the Russians had their League of Armed Neutrality. Thank God that at the Civil War, Russia sent fleets to our harbors to protect us so that the British and the French wouldn't come in on the side of the Confederacy. In other words, we have to make that alive for people today. I think that's what Scott is doing. He's kind of, for me, the spear point. But you look at what Sarah is doing with some of her trips. She's a spear point to that. There are a number of spears. They're all going in the right direction. If we can recognize that and then count ourselves in and become experts and speak to those ideas, then I think miracles can happen. I think Donald Trump could actually become better than himself and participate in transforming the world. I do think so.
So I would like to ask, because when it comes to U.S. tour of duty, I think a lot of people focus, because you guys have different shows going on between Ask the Inspector and the Whiners. I'm curious how you, Scott, and Jeff all met and started this interesting project.
So I mean, I will say that so Scott and Jeff have known each other for at least 20 plus years, going back to the work that Scott was doing around the Iraq War, and single-handedly waging that fight. I can't speak too much to their relationship, but I know that they had not met face to face until they came here a couple of years ago. Was it now 3 years ago here to Austin, where I held and sponsored a number of events at my house, at some local clubs. Actually, brought Scott to the Alex Jones show. What happened was that I, like you, was paying very close attention to the special military operation and the war danger. And I discovered this really cool thing called Telegram. And, I joined Scott's channel then. I mean, I was aware of Scott's work in the past. So I knew about what he was doing. But when I joined his channel and saw the discussion going on, I really felt compelled to engage directly because as bad as the United States has been, I know there is a good United States. I always liken it to the good angel and the bad angel on somebody's shoulder. There is a good angel. Oftentimes we have to kind of unleash that better angel of ourselves, to quote Lincoln, to make something good happen. And I really saw that his work is to bridge this American-Russian divide. And it was right there, personal for me, in my face. I became pretty active there, and his administrators asked me to help because there a lot of growth. Early on, as you know, Scott was really a lone, hardcore voice on what was happening around the special military operation from within the United States, and taking a lot of fire. He was taking a lot of fire, but he was shooting back, and the courage really inspired me. And I said, well, at minimum, I got to get involved in that somehow. So they asked me to help. And somewhere along the line, Jeff asked me, well, I wanted to bring them out here. I wanted to get some events. And I'll tell you what, the fight to give Scott a voice, to tell the truth, I saw it right here in Texas, because whether it's the SBU assassination threats against him or against many other Americans, or it's the neocon threats to just drag people's name through the mud. I mean, when I see people's name getting dragged through the mud and I look at what they're saying, and I know historically, I'm going to be right there for that fight. So it was a fight just to hold venues for Scott to speak, and got some of my other friends. You've probably seen Diane Sayre, Jose Vega.
I was interviewed alongside Diane Sayre back in I think December on Iranian TV. We weren't in the same or anything, but we were kind of a part of the same interview.
Diane and I go way back. Almost 30 years. So, it's just like a convergence, right? That's where it happened. And so Jeff asked me to help on the back end of Ask the Inspector, to help produce shows. And actually, we had a funny occurrence where I think Jeff's internet exploded. And it was right before the show started, and surprise, Ryan, you have to run the show. So I ad-libbed the whole show with Scott, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that's kind of when they said, well, okay, we'll see it. We'll try this guy out here. And so I have been honored by the work. I take everything that Scott does extremely seriously. I take this whole question of the war danger very seriously. My dialogue with my Russian friends, I take extremely seriously. Learning Russian, I take very seriously, but I tell you what, that takes courage too.
Ты говоришь по-русски?
Я немного говорю. So I think it's just it's one of those kinds of things. The whiners came out of that process, and the idea is to continue to reflect that mission in some way in our unique brand, and so that it's in parallel. That's really how it came about, and let's see how it goes, right? That's my idea. I want to expand the circle of collaboration. I don't think the United States is lost. I want the United States to be a good, strong nation, but I also want it to be a good neighbor.
Yeah, and looking at everything that you guys have been, the great work you guys have been doing, all the while taking that kind of heat. I mean, Scott, he's even to this day, the U.S. government still comes at him, and looking at the great work you and Jeff have done also, and it takes a lot of courage to kind of keep, like a bull with his horns, keep charging, despite the fact that you probably might anticipate coming under all kinds of scrutiny and all kinds of yellow journalism headed your way, all kinds of slander and whatnot. And yet to still keep hard charging like that. It's a massive inspiration for people like us who are coming up in these kinds of spaces. Seeing how much you guys have put on the line, it's, you guys are paving the way.
When I was in Russia this last trip, by the way, I planned my life around being there for the victory parade, and I was not in the parade. I got to see the rehearsals, and for the first week, which was the week of the parade, I was practically in tears everywhere I went in Russia because of the it's really hard to explain the way that people are during that time. There was not always a celebration or a focus on that celebration. It's been something that President Putin has kindled in the population. But it was momentous, and the idea that there were not Americans there really angered me, because Americans should have been marching in that parade. I think the last time we marched in that parade was 2010. We should have been there. So I guess when I got back, though, I was pulled aside by customs and questioned for going to Russia. Who do you know in the U.S. military? Who do you know in the Russian military? All kinds of questions. And you know what I did? I basically had the kind of conversation we're having with the guys there. I said, I don't really care. I'm just going to stand for the principles, totally be respectful. These guys weren't out to, sharpen their axe blade on my neck. They were just doing their job. But it was important for me to tell him what my thinking is. And again, I took that from Scott from when they gave him trouble. He's respectful, but he's not going to give an inch on the truth. And I think that's just what we have to be.
I've had many mutuals of mine go to Russia on Victory Day, and every single time I've spoken to them about it, they've always told me that it's a very momentous occasion. Like, you can feel, the energy in during that parade, right? During the celebrations, because it was very like it was very much a time in history where, you know, everything was just kind of um in a sense, like it was just a very dark period, right? And because of that, no one knew what was going to happen next. Everybody thought, especially in terms of Europe, they thought, well, this is the end. We're going to, you know, have to be under the Nazi regime. You know, the continent will plummet, the world will plummet, because it was a World War II, right? And it's, you know, it's a great sadness to know that such a celebration is not shared with the very allies, and this is something that Russia has pointed out themselves, right? Because they were historical allies with the Americans, right? It wasn't FDR and Churchill that were, you know, just allies. It was also Stalin. It was FDR, and then I suppose in terms of Churchill, but you know, I
And the
think
Chinese too.
absolutely. And this is it's tough for me as well, because I want to be able to, I'm Canadian, right? And you guys are American, and I want to be able to celebrate that piece of my history. And I think it's a very momentous thing. I think it's a great honor to be able to know that, you know, we were a part of that struggle. The Russians were the ones that had the most amount of casualties. They made the most amount of sacrifice. They were the reason why Berlin had fallen during that era. And, you know, we in the West were always being told, well, actually, like, we won that particular war. We won World War II. We defeated the Nazis. We defeated Hitler. But then, you know, they spit on the image of Russia and its, you know, history and its struggle, because they've had, as I said, they lost the most amount of people. They struggled immensely, and people's grandfathers and uncles and even just anybody that they'd known, like maybe even neighbors at the time, had sacrificed so much, right? It was an effort amongst the country. They really felt that. And so having that, the very nation celebrate, but then not being able to go there on a direct flight, or have my country also, you know, be in that parade, is a very difficult thing to it's a hard pill to swallow, because essentially now we're being told that we're enemies, right? You know, you know, hear this narrative about how Hitler of how you know, Putin is basically Hitler. They call him Putler, which is ridiculous. They say that Russia is the like Fourth Reich, and it's so frustrating, because, you know, if you even were to talk about history, and I've had this experience with people in real life as well, they don't know a thing or two, but they are so stuck in their ways, because they've been told over and over and over again this false narrative of how Russia is, you know, a bastion of savagery, and that they're not to be trusted, and that, you know, they're people who basically are a threat to us. And I've never felt that. I've talked to so many Russians, and they've always said that they are with the people, right? Because I believe I'm with the people of the world, and I believe that they're also in support of us, because they understand what we're being told is just lies and falsities. We're not, you know, we're not guilty of anything that our government does, where they take trillions of dollars and they put it towards, you know, Ukrainian Nazis and Azovites, whatever it may be, to kill innocent people, or to, you know, create amputees out of you know, just bystanders and civilians. It's very hard pill to swallow, but I can always recognize that even though my government may be against Russia and the Russian people, that doesn't mean I am, right? That doesn't mean that I have to be. I can recognize that these are people who are struggling just like myself in terms of seeing the truth. And I think it's a great experience for people to go to Russia and see the truth and to know that the Russians are very proud of their history, because all over the world they're telling you, no, actually, you shouldn't be proud of your history, right? And I think that's how a lot of Americans and Canadians feel as well. Yes, there are pieces of our history that I don't personally celebrate, right? But the gist of it is, you know, our history has typically been tied to revolutions, to, you know, the struggle against British imperialism, right? And I think that's something that Russians really have perfected in terms of, you know, being against this sense of, being a part of this unipolar hegemony that basically bullies the smaller guy, right? And they are for peace, right? I've never met a Russian person that hates their Ukrainian neighbor, because they don't, right? They understand that these are very much the similar people. They've lived long side beside each other.
And there's a lot of Ukrainians in Russia.
There's a lot of Ukrainians in Russia, right? I've met some Ukrainians who have told me personally that when they say that they don't want war with Russia, they are targeted by their own community, right? My country in particular has put a Ukrainian Nazi, right, and essentially given them a standing ovation during, it was, I believe it was like in the parliament, right? And it was really frustrating to see. We have Azafites or neo-Nazis, right, Ukrainian neo-Nazis, who are erecting statues of Stefan Bandera. They're pushing, you know, the Holodomor. And this is what's extremely, I believe, like, tough to see as a Canadian, because I know what my country has fought for. I know what the American people have fought for. I know what the free people have always fought and strived for, right? Even, the founders have taken, inspiration from Lenin, or Engels, or Marx, or whoever it may have been, right? Who now are being told, oh, well, actually, these are our enemies, right? And one of the things that I've seen is that many of the leaders of the free world, such as Ho Chi Minh, who have said, oh, well, actually, I'm a big fan of the founding fathers. I'm a big fan of the revolution, right? And then you're told, well, actually, these are people who are enemies of you, right? Even though that they've also been propped up previously by the states or whoever it may be, right? We're basically told that people who admire us and actually love us, are like caricatures of who usually our politicians are, right? Bloodthirsty warmongers and such. And that's frustrating to, I think, as someone who believes in unity and a multipolar world.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is frustrating. I think that, speaking of Canada, I have a number of thoughts on Canada. One is that we did have war plans to invade Canada going back some years as a launch pad to invade and, invade England. But if you go back a little further, right, you had the Trans-Canadian Railroad, which was, again, Americans working with Canadians to build that, because the idea was that along the railroads, along the development, you could build civilization, you could build society, you could build cities, you could grow the nation. That's the Ulysses Grant and Sherman. They had the idea of building a railroad network for Mexico. They were stymied by various others who wanted to steal the national patrimony of Mexico, the oil, for themselves. Again, that's the fight within the United States, but across the border. Going back to Roosevelt as an example, and I think the thing to do, which is a little bit counterintuitive, is to take those periods in history and reflect them back to us so that we can say, hey, here's the roadmap. We don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. 1939, Harry Dexter White wrote a proposal for Franklin Roosevelt called the Loans to Latin America for Industrial Development of Latin America. And the idea was an inter-American bank for development of all of the Americas. Remember, in 1876 in Philadelphia was the centennial celebration. So 100 years of the existence of the United States in Philadelphia. You had Emperor Don Pedro of Brazil was here. You had members of the Chinese, I forget what department, customs departments. There's a book called Journey to the East by Li Gui, where this Chinese official traveled east to come to the United States for that particular celebration. Actually, something that came up when I was in Tula. Tula is a historic weapons manufacturing in Russia. And so I was at the Tula factory looking at the entire development of Russian weapon history. An amazing place. I totally recommend it, Grant, if you're a historian. This is the place to go. But in there is a plaque, an award to the Tula factories from the 1876 centennial, where they were given awards for their weapons development at the time in terms of technology and innovation. So going back to 1939 with this Inter-American Bank for Development, you're talking about unipolarity versus multipolarity, Timmy. And it wasn't adopted at that time, but it became the basis for the Bretton Woods institution later. And with all the failures that represented, the idea that we could change the name of American exceptionalism, which is typically, it's got a pretty negative concept, but the idea was other countries, our mission was going to be that other countries would have the right to develop. We developed at the time of, by 1876, more rapidly than any nation had up to that point. You had, when they were coming and going through all of the machinery in 1876, you had a recognition that the average worker in America had conditions of life better than the royalty of Europe. Things like indoor plumbing, for example. So the conditions of life were better. Our mission as a nation was to replicate that everywhere we could. And if you can recognize that, and if you go back in the history and you find those elements, and you find who fought for that, then you can see that we could bring that to bear now. Again, in the darkness of the danger of nuclear war, you have the potential for this kind of change in course. Now, I have a picture there. There's one more picture there that I put, if you can throw that up, because in terms of the darkness question, so this is General Donahue. I recommend people go and see Wednesday's Ask the Inspector. Scott had a lot to say about General Donahue, but he recently, I guess it was middle of July, he gave a speech. He is a significant general. I'm not going to go through all the details, but this is not just a boardroom general. This is
Delta Force, if I'm not mistaken. Delta,
that's right.
82nd Airborne Ranger tabbed.
Absolutely. He is an experienced military genius. And he went through how NATO could effectively take Kaliningrad in a conflict with Russia. Scott made the point that he had to make this statement because NATO is dying. So, in fact, the irony is that the rush to get these conflicts with Russia, etc., the rush to use tariffs in a way that is not the way that you would typically use tariffs. Tariffs are great to protect your home industry as long as you're investing in your home industry and developing things. That we've actually strengthened that that multipolarity. So this is, if anything, a sign that the unipolar world is dying. So in that sense, people should be optimistic about what we could do right now. But we have to know the history. We have to know the history, and we have to know what the policy alternatives are. So again, that's why I recognize, I want to go back to Franklin Roosevelt. He was a genius. He understood these kinds of things in his work with Stalin. John F. Kennedy probably would have been the continuation of that policy if he hadn't been assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. understood it. Malcolm X did understand it too. That's why they were killed, because they became the voice of reason to the moral quality to develop nations. You know, economy is not like Richard Warner, who was on Tucker Carlson, just pure statistics of dollars and cents. If you go to Russia today and you talk with thinkers, they understand economy is physical development. Your roads, bridges, dams, waterways, all of those kinds of things upon which you build your civilization. And that's what they're doing with the Belt and Road Initiative with China. We have to participate in that. The planet improves better under those circumstances.
100%, and, in pertaining to what this gentleman, General Donahue, has said, you're absolutely right. He said this particular, quote, mainly because the allies of America and America has seen a downfall or a downstream of their empire, right? They've been overextending for decades, getting into countless wars, wars of attrition, right? And that's something that I think we need to acknowledge is many of these are wars of attrition. That, as I know Grant had previously mentioned, they're not very beneficial, right? And this is the issue that we've seen time and time again. A lot of these, individuals within the military, they're being told by, people who are probably in the administration will go ahead and say this and go ahead and say that to protect, our relations, to protect the narrative and such, right? And that's to keep this illusion to those who, watch mass media and still believe in all this, where it's like, oh, Russia is failing, and we can just take over Russia, and we can, have Ukraine as an ally forever and such, right? I spoke to a good mutual of mine, actually, and he said that he knows a couple of people who are, they work in Washington and such, and it wasn't until recently they still were believing that they were going to win this war, that like Ukraine was going to come out on top of Russia or whatever it was, and that, Russia is actually a paper tiger, which isn't the case. This is a nation that is going to become, or I believe by now has been, the fourth largest economy in Europe. It's a country that has gone back to its roots of local economics, right? Because they are taking back their businesses instead of focusing on American or Western companies, right? The streets are clean. They have a lot of plans in terms of Siberia and actually building new cities and such that are going to allow for more jobs and, a little bit of a spread out compared to, the overpopulation or density in Moscow or St. Petersburg. And this also pertains to back when Putin came in after Boris Yeltsin, right? They had seen, like, Russia at that time was in the gutter, right? The oligarchs, basically were giving these 400% interest loans and they were struggling exceptionally, and somehow KFC was, or McDonald's was like the biggest reason as to why they left the Soviet Union or whatever. It's like, oh, look at this freedom. And it's like, no, like, they had taken so many prices, right, in order to get away from, this sense of wanting a unified civilizational state, right? And essentially what ended up happening is when Putin came in, he nationalized Sochi. Sochi is an energy company in Russia, and what ended up happening is when he nationalized it, the average Russian was able to benefit from it, right? Because at the time, the average Russian was barely able to pay for their groceries. At this time, during a conflict, they are coming back better than ever. The average Westerner is, I mean, not to say that Russia isn't dealing with certain things. Of course, every nation is. But we see us spending our tax dollars on, these ridiculous wars, endless wars with people who we don't even know, we've never met. I don't understand why I would have, any sort of issue with someone in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Ukraine. It makes no sense to me. Whereas, in my local area, we might actually have, pavements and sidewalks that aren't even laid properly, right? And that's the thing. It's like people are upset at this, and we're continuously seeing this, right? So when the average citizen is witnessing this, I think a lot of individuals have this curiosity where we want to actually see what the other side has to say, right? China has really perfected this, where it is a part of the, it started the Belt and Road Initiative. They believe in working with any nation, right? And I do believe that's the case for many other countries.
Grant, I have a map that I just put up, and to address what Timmy's saying, I don't want to take anything away from what China's doing, but the real Belt and Road Initiative was initiated with this map. Gilpin was the first governor of the Colorado Territory in the United States. He had developed this map to build railroads from across North America into South America and across the Bering Strait into Russia, Asia, the continent of Africa, and Europe. So this is an early idea that was discussed here in the United States. And without going into a lot of detail, the idea was that we could ring the world with a tramway of iron, and by doing so, bring development to nations and defeat the maritime empires of the British. So this is one of the old maps that were developed in the 1840s, I want to say.
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
Do you think that this speaks to I know that several thinkers have proposed this in the past, but a grand North American Siberia.
I lost Grant there for a second.
I was gonna make a Dugan joke.
Go ahead, Grant.
I was going to ask if this speaks to the potential creation of one day a grand trans-Alaskan Siberian railway or roadway, if you will. Because I know that there's been several brilliant thinkers who've proposed this in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was even discussion about it in the 80s towards the tail end of the Reagan administration. I hope I'm not getting that incorrect. And yet it's one of these things that was never capitalized on, even during the period when the United States and Russia had been cultivating what looked, at least at the time, for the time being, a warm relationship.
I mean, I'm suggesting that people should think about this with the potential of the meeting between President Putin and Trump. It has to inspire your imagination. That's what I'm saying. There were discussions at the Russian Academy of Sciences about this, in the last number of decades. So it is. As far away as it seems in one sense, it is also very close. I mean, the engineering work has been done. It's the political thing. The engineering we can solve. I have a picture on my wall of the handshake in space, which was painted by artist from Arizona. I forget his name right now. But it was about when Soyuz and Apollo met in 1975 in space and docked, and just the tremendous difficulty of docking two completely different technologies in space. These things happened, right? So we have to embrace the potential that those things can happen. That's the only way to think about it. There's no other reason. I mean, yeah, we want our kids to have a future, but the question is, what is the future that they're going to have? So, China, they're doing tremendous things. The United States, by adopting that British doctrine of imperialism, has absented itself from the very engine of good that it could be. Alongside now with these other countries. So I think that we simply just need to refocus on those kinds of things. That's why it's so inspiring to know that Scott is back in Russia. As he said, I don't know what I can talk about on that, but needless to say, when the FBI visited him to return some things to him, he knew he was invited. I mean, the number of invitations he's had to go back to Russia for various important events he's like the diplomat for America to Russia that America doesn't officially have in power. So he's doing the work on behalf of the United States with zero recognition. I mean, that is the way we have to think of it. Why don't we all just adopt that notion, right? And find out ways to bring that across to other people. So I think it's possible.
I think so too. I think a lot of us can become modern diplomats, right? I think diplomacy, and I have a great mutual of mine. He also has traveled to various countries. He's always like jet setting. He's technically the co-host of Not One Step Back, but I haven't been able to catch him. But he's been to Russia many times. And he's told me, and this was, a big space that I did in order to kind of introduce him to the world. And he said, you can be a diplomat by just having learnt about other people's, cultures and societies. And, their, especially economic, like political economy, right? Which is something that nobody talks about anymore. They're just focused on the words and the numbers, and it's terrible. But he has said many times that we can all become diplomats, and by showing respect, by showing mutual relations, and being able to just connect with others, have conversations, have discussions, like listen with an open ear, right? When you basically point the finger at somebody right before you even know them, then you're never going to be a real diplomat. You're just going to be more or less a bully, right? You do what I say, and if you don't, then you're out. And even if you do, and Kissinger, as much as I, have my thoughts about him, he has said this before in terms of to be a ally of America can be fatal, right? Because they don't have allies or friends. It's just interests. So I don't want just interests. Of course we all have interests.
That came from Lord Palmerston. No
Oh,
permanent allies, only permanent interests.
yeah. Yeah, it's just I think that's what I want to see for the future is that yeah, absolutely. Scott Ritter is someone who I admire because he has stood up for Russia. He has given us the realities of what's going on. He's a diplomat that, yeah, we don't have in power for the entire world to see as much in terms of the like being an official administrated, but I just feel that he's worth more than most of these politicians, right? Because does this by drive, right? Not for money, not for power, but he does this because he believes the truth. And he's a patriot in that sense, right?
And I think that the best thing we could do is copy that, go visit our congressman.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I believe that we shouldn't focus on what's going on, with the imperialists and the warmongers. We should focus on what do people like Chris, like Halali or Scott Ritter, all these other individuals, right? How do we become peace activists for the world, right? Because I think it starts at home, right? Talking to your own people, letting them know what's going on. If you have the knowledge, share it, right? It's not about imposing yourself. I understand that so many people don't know things, and I've had so many conversations with people about Russia and China and all these other countries, and when they hear or understand things, it's like, oh, well, you know what, before I didn't understand, or I was a little bit more ignorant and I had this perception, but now I've done a complete 360, right? I've known a little bit more because of my interest. Like, it's just, how you come about it. But some people just have to learn, and that's it. It's like, with an open ear and an open heart, that's all it really takes, is just to learn and to have these discussions. And we're having these discussions, and we're able to, spread it to the world. And social media is the forefront of that. I would have never been able to talk to so many people around the world, including Russians. Myself and Grant actually did a interview on Ukraine and Russian relations a couple of days ago, and that's what's inspired me to stream today, because before I've never done it. But it's like, you know what, so many people can listen to us, and this is us being diplomats. We're telling people what's going on, we're educating them. Are we incentivized or pushed? No, it's out of love. It's out of patriotism, and I think that's what it is. Patriotism is a huge part of just having love.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That's one of my favorite quotes from Kennedy. In a certain sense, it's not exactly, but I keep it on my X profile, where he said that no government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. And he said, as Americans, we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economy and industrial growth, in culture and in acts of courage. And then he said, let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future. So I think that, that for me is what I could say here, to the two of you and to the audience.
Thank you.
So I appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it as well.
Maybe we can go to Russia together.
Yeah, that would be great.
Fingers crossed that I do get an opportunity to go to Russia, hopefully next year. But if we are able to go all together, that would be an amazing experience. I'd love to visit all around the world, have these talks in person, have these relations, because I think this is the new world, right? Like, this is multipolarity. I think it's not going to be these old heads who are going to live forever and their legacies. We're going to start a new world, and we're going to start a new civilizational state that's going to work with countries like Russia and China and Iraq, the countries that we have historically bullied. We are going to be friends with them, because I believe that my friendship as a person, as a people, right? When I'm friends with these Russians, when I'm friends with these, people from all over the world, that means my country should be too, because that's what the people want, right? I don't care what happens, in the administration in parliament where they're giving overstanding ovations to, Ukrainian Nazis. I believe in the people, right? And that's all that matters to me.
And I do think Canada has made tremendous changes lately too. It's not the same as it was a number of years ago. There's people pretty upset there.
Yeah, my friend who's from his name's Nicholas Reed. He lives in Russia, but currently he's in Canada visiting. Actually, he told me when he came back, one of the things that he was surprised about, because he had left back in May 2024, he saw a lot of Ukrainian flags, a lot of pro-Ukraine and such. But now, almost over a year later, yeah, there's none.
None here either. I'm in Austin, Texas.
So. It's not to say that we as individuals have any. We as a people don't have animosity towards the average everyday Ukrainian civilian. I have nothing against the Ukrainian people. I understand and I respect that they are very similar to those who are neighbors, right? They're Russian neighbors. I think that they are victims to, NATO. I think they're victims to BlackRock. And I hope that many of them see that, and I know many of them have been seeing that, and it's a very unfortunate situation.
Hey, Timmy, BlackRock has pulled out of Ukraine.
Have they really?
Well, their deal's fallen apart because all the territory that they wanted to buy and control, well, it's Russian territory now.
That's interesting to hear. Let's just say that. I've thought for a while that what BlackRock would have, America would have wanted is to have BlackRock take their real estate and essentially get them to be like slaves of the American empire and just have a lot of debt accumulate because, we supported you in this war, and after this war, you owe us, right? And this is the issue that I had where, they were going to be in the hands of Americans, the mercy of the Americans, or the American government. But now I don't necessarily feel like that might be the case, because if Putin were to take over and, or if he was to essentially take Ukraine under its arm and protect it, they would say fuck off to BlackRock or whoever.
Well, actually, I think that is going to happen. I think that what's in store for Ukraine is a future. Once the relationship with Russia is improved, it's going to take some time. There's nothing good going on for NATO, European Union forces. They're desperate. Ukraine's going to be back in that sphere. And, go to Moscow, go to Vedinha, where they have, it's like a Disneyland for the achievements of the Soviet Union. Kind of the centerpiece of it is the Friendship Fountain. And it's all of the state as statues, right? And in the center is Moscow, Belarus, and Ukraine. They're kind of the centerpiece of the whole thing, or the face of the Friendship Fountain. I think that what'll happen is Ukraine will come back to that relationship again.
I truly wish the best for the Ukrainian people, and I hope to see that happen for sure. And I hope that, one day we can consolidate with what we've done to the Ukrainian people, because I do believe that they're victims. And I do believe that Ukraine is in the hands and the pawns of the empire. but I hope to work with the Ukrainian people. I hope to work with the Russian people. I hope to work with everybody. And I hope for peace. And I think this is a way of, diplomacy and peacemaking. And I absolutely hope that, Russia is able to take Ukraine under its arms. And, it was one of the poorest regions during the Soviet Union. And what I want for them is to come out of, any level of poverty or warfare or whatever it may be, and essentially gain the benefit of being under Russia, because Russia's doing great. I just hope Ukraine does as well.
Yep.
For sure. And I hope every other nation does the same. I hope Canada does. I hope America does. And I hope that we can all one day go to Moscow and have Victory Day together and march in the parade. That's my wish for the world. And I hope we're all there together. So, yeah. Thank you so much once again, Ryan and Grant, for being a part of this. This was a great stream and experience. I know this was our first. Ooh. And we have 5.5K people watching, and this is amazing because I had no idea that many people would be willing to even watch with us. And once again, thank you to everybody that's watched and supported us today. It was just a different experience, and I'm glad that we got to do this and we got to talk about the START Treaty and Russia and the connection of our historical allyship, right? And I hope to do this more in the future. Yeah. I hope to have you, Ryan, on our streams as well, because this was an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
Really, I learned a lot. You as well, Brent, as always.
Thank you for coming on the show, Ryan. And thank you again, Timmy, as always.
Yeah, I'm so happy. And thank you once again to everybody for watching. Please, follow us on Twitter, support us on YouTube, whatever it may be. And, give us some feedback, since this was the first time. I know there was a little bit of echoing, but, headphones can definitely fix that. But until next time, thank you so much, guys. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one, guys. Bye.